They called his grandpa's map worthless, until the earthquake trapped them underground. When Marcus Chun unfolded the yellowed map in his grandfather's attic, everyone told him it was worthless. But 3 days later, that forgotten piece of paper became the only thing standing between his family and death. Welcome to my channel, Heartfire Obsession. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The discovery that changed everything. Marcus had been clearing out his grandfather's belongings for nearly a week when he found it, wedged between two warped floorboards in the attic of the old mountain cabin. The paper crackled like autumn leaves as he pulled it free, releasing decades of dust into the stale air. His grandfather, William Chun, had died 3 months earlier at 92, leaving behind a lifetime of what most people called hoarding. But Marcus knew better. His grandfather never kept anything without reason. The map showed the surrounding Cascade Mountains in detail that shouldn't exist, not for something drawn in the 1950s. Valleys that modern maps missed. Springs marked with Chinese characters. And strangest of all, a network of caves illustrated with meticulous precision, each entrance numbered and annotated in his grandfather's cramped handwriting. Just throw it away, Marcus's wife, Sarah, said when he showed her that evening. She was exhausted, 7 months pregnant with their first child, and frustrated by the endless task of sorting through William's possessions. Your grandfather collected every scrap of paper he ever touched. It's probably from some old hiking club. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. The detail was too precise. The annotations too specific. One note in particular caught his eye, written in English rather than Chinese. When the mountain moves, follow the numbers. The mountain that wouldn't stay still. 2 days later, Marcus understood. He woke at 3:47 a.m. to the sound of the world tearing itself apart. The cabin bucked like a wild animal, throwing him from the bed. Sarah's scream cut through the grinding roar as pictures crashed from walls, and the floor rolled in waves that defied physics. The earthquake lasted 93 seconds. Marcus counted every one. Frozen in the doorframe with Sarah clutched against him, her hands protecting the swell of her belly. When it stopped, the silence was worse than the noise. "We're okay," he whispered, but he was wrong. Dawn revealed the truth. The earthquake, a 7.8 that would later be called the Cascade Fracture, had fundamentally altered the landscape. The main road down the mountain had vanished, replaced by a 15-foot-deep crevasse that ran for miles. The cell towers were down. The landline was dead. And when Marcus climbed to the ridge to get a better view, his blood went cold. 3 separate landslides had sealed every conventional route off the mountain. They were trapped, along with Sarah's elderly parents who'd been staying in the cabin's guest room, and Marcus's younger sister Emma, who'd driven up the day before to help with the clearing. 5 people. 1 pregnant woman. No way down. When modern technology fails. Marcus tried everything he knew. His phone had no signal, not surprising, but devastating. The emergency radio picked up only static. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles away by road, but that road no longer existed. He considered hiking out for help, but Sarah's pregnancy complicated everything. She was already having occasional contractions, false labor that came with stress. Moving her on foot through unstable terrain could trigger early labor or worse. Emma suggested waiting for rescue. "They'll send helicopters," she said hopefully. She was 23 and still carried the optimism of someone who'd never seen systems fail. But Marcus had seen the news broadcasts before the power died. The earthquake had struck along a fault line that ran for 200 miles. Dozens of communities were affected. Thousands were trapped. Resources would be stretched impossibly thin. And his family? They weren't even on anyone's priority list. This cabin was off-grid, unregistered, unknown to emergency services. They had water from the well, if the earthquake hadn't contaminated it. They had food for maybe a week, less if rationed poorly. They had firewood and basic medical supplies. But they didn't have time. Sarah's father, Robert, was diabetic. His insulin supply would last 12 days, maybe 14 if stretched. After that, things would get very bad very quickly. "We need another way out," Marcus said that night, gathering everyone in the living room by lantern light. "And I think I might know where to find it." He spread his grandfather's map on the table. The map they all dismissed. "You can't be serious," Emma said immediately. "That thing is 70 years old. Even if those caves exist, they could have collapsed decades ago." Robert studied the map with tired eyes. Marcus, I appreciate creative thinking, but it's a children's treasure map. Look at it. Hand-drawn notations. No topographical data. No survey markings. Your grandfather was a good man, Sarah added gently, her hand on Marcus's arm. But he wasn't a cartographer. He was a railroad worker who liked to hike. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He was also the only person who walked these mountains every single week for 40 years. He knew things that never made it onto official maps. And you want to bet our lives on that. Emma's voice rose. You want Sarah to climb through unmapped caves while she's 7 months pregnant? I want us to have options, Marcus shot back. Because sitting here waiting for rescue that might not come for weeks isn't a plan. It's surrender. The argument stretched past midnight. Sarah's mother, Linda, mostly stayed quiet, but Marcus caught her studying the map when she thought no one was looking. Finally, Sarah herself ended the debate. Show me the first entrance, she said quietly. Just show me. If it's real, if it looks safe, we'll consider it. If not, we wait for rescue. The first test. At dawn, Marcus led them to the location marked 1 on the map. A rocky outcrop 200 yards west of the cabin, hidden behind a thick stand of Douglas firs. According to his grandfather's notes, there should be a narrow opening beneath an overhang, partially concealed by roots. There's nothing here, Emma said flatly, scanning the rocks. I told you this was. Wait. Linda crouched down, pulling aside a curtain of hanging roots. Behind them, barely visible in the early light, was a gap in the stone, maybe 2 feet wide, descending into darkness. Marcus's heart hammered. He pulled a flashlight from his pack and aimed it into the opening. The beam revealed rough stone walls, dry and stable, leading down at a gentle angle. And there, carved into the stone about 10 feet in, was a number 1 inside a circle, exactly as his grandfather had marked it on the map. No way, Emma breathed. Sarah's hand found Marcus's, squeezing tight. How many entrances are there? Marcus looked at the map, at the careful network of passages his grandfather had documented. 17. And if he's right, if we follow them in order, he traced the route with his finger. They lead all the way down to the valley floor, bypassing every slide zone. That's impossible, Robert said. But he was staring at the carved number, and his voice had lost its certainty. Grandfather left us a message, Marcus said, remembering the final note on the map. When the mountain moves, follow the numbers. He knew. Somehow, he knew this would happen. Or he prepared just in case, Sarah said softly. Because that's what survivors do. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of disturbed earth and broken trees. Somewhere in the distance, they heard the crack and rumble of another rockfall. The mountain still settling, still dangerous. Time was running out in ways they couldn't control. We need to scout the route, Marcus said. Map it ourselves, make sure it's actually passable. Emma and I will go first thing tomorrow. And if it's not? Robert asked. If this is just wishful thinking based on an old man's fantasy? Marcus folded the map carefully, tucking it into his jacket. Then we'll have wasted a day. But if it's real? He looked at each of them in turn. These people he loved, trapped and running out of options. If it's real, it's the miracle we need. The message in the margin. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus studied the map by candlelight while Sarah slept fitfully beside him. He'd examined it dozens of times already, but something had been nagging at him, a feeling that he'd missed something important. Then he saw it. In the bottom margin, written so small he'd initially mistaken it for a smudge, was a line of text in Chinese. Marcus's Mandarin was rusty, learned in childhood and half forgotten, but he could make out the characters. The earth remembers. The old paths never die. His hands trembled slightly as he traced his grandfather's handwriting. William Chun had come to America in 1949, fleeing the aftermath of China's Civil War. He'd worked on railroad crews, lived in mining camps, spent decades in these mountains. And somehow, impossibly, he'd discovered or perhaps remembered something that everyone else had forgotten. Ancient people had lived in these mountains for thousands of years before settlers arrived. They'd known the caves, used them, mapped them in ways that predated any official survey. Had his grandfather found evidence of those old routes? Had he spent 40 years not just hiking, but documenting a network of passages that existed long before modern maps? A soft knock startled him. Linda stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Can't sleep either? She asked. Marcus shook his head. Just thinking about tomorrow. About what we might find. Linda sat beside him, looking at the map. Your grandfather gave you this gift for a reason. He knew you'd be the one to understand it. What if I'm wrong? What if I lead us into those caves and... Then we'll face that together, Linda interrupted gently. But Marcus, I've been thinking about something. That earthquake changed everything in seconds. The mountain itself rearranged. And your grandfather's note said, when the mountain moves. Not if. When. He expected this. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. You think he predicted the earthquake? I think he understood that mountains don't stay still forever. That eventually, the old paths would become the only paths. She patted his hand. Tomorrow, you and Emma go see what's down there. The rest of us will prepare. Because if those caves are real, if they can save us, we're going to need to be ready to move fast. As Linda returned to her room, Marcus stared at the map one more time. 17 entrances. 17 passages. A route that wound through the mountain itself, following paths that had existed long before anyone thought to fear earthquakes or landslides. His grandfather had left them more than a map. He'd left them a lifeline. But as Marcus finally lay down to sleep, one question haunted him. If the caves were real, if they really could lead them to safety, what else might they find down there in the dark? The first passage proved the map was real, but by the time Marcus and Emma reached the fourth entrance, they discovered why some paths are meant to stay hidden. Into the mountain's memory. Marcus and Emma stood at the first entrance as gray dawn broke, both carrying packs loaded with rope, water, first aid supplies, and enough light to map a route through hell itself. The opening looked smaller than it had yesterday, or perhaps Marcus's courage had shrunk overnight. Last chance to call me crazy, he said, adjusting his headlamp. Emma surprised him with a fierce hug. You're not crazy. You're the smartest one here. She pulled back, her young face set with determination Marcus hadn't seen before. Grandpa William trusted you with this. That means something. The descent through the first passage took 30 minutes of careful climbing, following carved handholds that showed signs of ancient use, smooth stone worn by countless hands over centuries. The air stayed surprisingly fresh, cool, but not stale, suggesting good ventilation. And every 50 feet or so, they found another marking. Numbers, arrows, Chinese characters that Marcus wished he could read more fluently. The first passage opened into a natural chamber about the size of their cabin's living room. And there, exactly as marked on the map, were 3 different exit tunnels, each one numbered. He really did map the whole thing, Emma whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. Marcus, this is incredible. These caves are old. Marcus finished, running his hand over marks carved into the wall. Not his grandfather's marks. These were older, much older. Pictographs showing figures moving through passages, carrying bundles, leading animals. Emma, I don't think Grandpa discovered these caves. I think he rediscovered them. They followed passage number 2 according to the map, marking their own route with reflective tape as they went. This tunnel descended more steeply, requiring them to rope down through 2 narrow chimneys where ancient handholds had worn almost smooth. But the route was solid, passable, and it led exactly where the map indicated, to another chamber with multiple exits. By noon, they'd confirmed 4 passages. By mid-afternoon, they'd reached the 7th entrance and made a discovery that changed everything. The Chamber of Records. Passage 7 opened into a cavern unlike anything they'd encountered before. This wasn't natural geology, this was engineered space. The walls showed clear signs of tool marks. The ceiling had been reinforced with ancient timbers that somehow hadn't rotted, and along one wall, protected by an overhang, were markings that made Marcus's breath catch. These are maps, he said, his flashlight revealing layers of carved illustrations showing the mountain in cross-section. Emma, these are ancient survey maps. Who made them? Emma asked, but Marcus was already seeing the answer in the other carvings. Figures hunting elk. Figures gathering at what might be seasonal camps. Figures moving through the mountains in long lines, following routes that went underground when winter storms hit. The people who lived here first, he said softly. Before settlers, before anyone we learned about in school. They didn't just know about these caves, they used them. maybe for centuries. Emma was examining another section of wall. Marcus, look at this. She'd found what appeared to be a warning marker, a series of carved symbols showing the mountain in two states. In the first carving, the mountain was whole. In the second, it had changed, with lines showing fractures and collapsed sections. And below that, a route marked through the mountain, bypassing the damaged areas. They knew. Marcus breathed. Earthquakes happened before, maybe many times, and they documented safe routes for when it happened again. And somehow your grandfather found this place, Emma said. He found their records and created his own map based on their knowledge. Marcus pulled out his grandfather's map and compared it to the ancient carvings. The correlation was unmistakable. William Chun hadn't just hiked these mountains randomly. He'd been following clues, piecing together an ancient puzzle, translating knowledge that had been waiting in the dark for someone to care enough to find it. We need to keep moving, Marcus said, taking photographs of the carvings with his waterproof camera. If the route keeps matching the map, we can have everyone down to the valley floor in 2 days, maybe less. But as they prepared to leave the chamber, Emma noticed something that made her grab Marcus's arm. What's that? She pointed to the far corner where their lights hadn't yet reached. Something was piled there, not rocks, not ancient timbers. Something that reflected their light with an unnatural gleam. Marcus approached slowly, his light revealing the truth in pieces. Metal, plastic, modern materials. And there, half buried under decades of dust, was a backpack with patches marking it as U.S. Forest Service. Someone else found this place, Emma said quietly. Marcus opened the pack with trembling hands. Inside were supplies from the 1980s, energy bars still wrapped, a water bottle, maps, and a notebook. He opened the notebook carefully, the pages yellowed and brittle. The first entry was dated July 15, 1987. Found incredible cave system matching local legends. Native American origin, possibly pre-contact. Documenting for Forest Service survey. Marcus flipped through more pages, watching the entries grow more excited, more detailed. The writer, a ranger named Patricia Donovan, had been exploring the caves for weeks, mapping the system, making discoveries. And then, on August 22, 1987, the final entry. Earthquake hit last night. Small one, 4.5, but it's changed things. Several passages look unstable now. Going to mark dangerous sections, then report findings. This system needs to be documented properly. Could save lives someday. There were no more entries. Marcus looked at Emma, his stomach sinking. She never made it out. They found Patricia Donovan 30 feet into Passage 8. The earthquake she'd written about had caused a partial collapse, and she'd been caught in it. Her remains were barely visible under the fallen rock, but beside her, protected by her body, was her complete survey notebook sealed in a waterproof case. Emma turned away, tears streaming. Marcus gently retrieved the notebook, his hands shaking. Patricia Donovan had done exactly what they were doing now, trying to document these caves for the future. And it had killed her. Should we turn back? Emma asked, her voice small. Marcus looked at the notebook, then at his grandfather's map. No, we finished what they both started. Patricia documented passages 9 through 13 before the earthquake. If we combine her notes with Grandpa's map, we'll know exactly which sections might be unstable. The route that tests everything. The next 4 passages confirmed Marcus's worst and best fears. Patricia Donovan's notes revealed that 3 of the routes shown on his grandfather's map had become unstable after the 1987 quake, and there was no guarantee they'd survive the recent 7.8. But her survey had also documented alternative routes his grandfather hadn't known about, ways to bypass dangerous sections. By the time Marcus and Emma climbed back out at Entrance 1, night had fallen and 14 hours had passed. They were exhausted, filthy, and carrying information that would either save their family or condemn them to a desperate gamble. Sarah met them at the cabin door, relief and fear warring on her face. Well, Marcus spread both maps on the table, his grandfather's and Patricia Donovan's combined notes. It's real. It's all real. The route goes all the way through, and if we're careful, if we move smart, we can make it. But, Robert asked, reading Marcus's expression, but 3 of the passages are questionable. The 1987 earthquake damaged them, and the recent quake might have made things worse. We'd be taking a risk. versus the risk of staying here? Sarah asked. She'd been timing her contractions. They were becoming more regular, more intense. Stress-induced labor was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. Marcus, I can't have this baby in a cabin with no power, no medical equipment, and no way to get help if something goes wrong. Linda spoke up quietly. What do you need to make it safer? Marcus looked at Emma, then back at the maps. Time to scout the questionable sections. A day, maybe two. We reinforce where we can, mark the dangerous spots, create safety protocols. And we need to move supplies down in stages. We can't carry everything in one trip, not with Sarah's condition. How long until I run out of insulin? Robert asked. 9 days, Marcus admitted. If we ration perfectly. The room fell silent. 9 days to scout, reinforce, and move 5 people through miles of underground passages, including a pregnant woman who could go into labor at any moment and a diabetic whose life depended on medication they couldn't replace. We start tomorrow, Sarah said firmly. Marcus, you and Emma take 1 more day to scout and reinforce. The rest of us will organize supplies, prepare packs, and figure out what we can carry versus what we have to leave behind. She looked at each of them in turn. We're doing this because we have to, but we're also doing it because 2 people, Grandpa William and Patricia Donovan, gave their knowledge, and in Patricia's case her life, to make this possible. We owe it to them to try. The preparation that reveals character. The next day revealed who they really were under pressure. Robert, despite his age and medical condition, proved to be the logistics genius they needed. He created a detailed inventory system, dividing supplies into categories: essential, necessary, and wishful thinking. He calculated carrying weights down to the ounce, factoring in Sarah's pregnancy and his own reduced stamina. Linda showed unexpected physical strength, hauling gear and supplies without complaint. She'd been a nurse for 30 years before retiring, and her medical knowledge became invaluable as she assembled a field medical kit that could handle everything from minor injuries to, though no one said it aloud, emergency childbirth. Emma transformed from a scared young woman into their communications expert. She rigged a system using walkie-talkies and reflective markers that would allow them to maintain contact even if they got separated in the caves. She also took charge of documenting everything, photographing the maps, the routes, the key markers, in case something happened to the originals. And Sarah, 7 months pregnant and facing the impossible, became their moral center. When arguments broke out about what to carry or which routes to take, her calm voice would cut through the tension. We survive together, or we don't survive at all. Every decision keeps us all alive. Marcus used the day to make 3 critical modifications to their planned route. Using rope, climbing gear, and improvised anchors, he reinforced 2 sections that Patricia's notes had flagged as unstable. He also discovered something his grandfather had hidden: supply caches at key points along the route. William Chun had actually stocked 5 of the caves with emergency supplies: water purification tablets, preserved food, first aid kits, even blankets sealed in waterproof containers. He really did prepare for this, Marcus told Emma as they examined the 3rd cache. It's like he knew someday someone would need these caves to survive. Or he hoped no one ever would, Emma replied softly. But he made sure we'd have a chance if the worst happened. By evening, they'd completed their scouting. 3 passages were confirmed dangerous, but passable with extreme care. 4 passages were solid and safe. The remaining 10 were somewhere in between, requiring attention and caution but not prohibitive risk. Marcus called a final meeting. Tomorrow at dawn, we start moving supplies. We'll stage equipment in 3 caches along the route. Then the day after, we go through as a group, all together. No one gets left behind. What about? Robert gestured vaguely at Sarah's belly. If I go into labor, we deal with it, Sarah said flatly. Linda knows what to do, and honestly, having a baby in a cave can't be worse than having one in a cabin with no power and no way to get real help. Actually, Linda said, the caves maintain a constant temperature. They're cleaner than you'd think, with no wind or weather to complicate things. If it happens, we'll manage. The night before. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood outside the cabin, staring at the stars and thinking about the weight of what they were attempting. 5 lives depending on a 70-year-old map and the knowledge of people who died decades or centuries before. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, stories told when Marcus was young. William Chun speaking about the mountains, about patience, about how survival was never about strength. It was about wisdom passed down, knowledge preserved, the willingness to trust what came before. You found the caves, didn't you? Marcus whispered to the night. You found Patricia's work, documented her route, combined it with the ancient maps. And you prepared, year after year, hoping we'd never need it, but making damn sure we'd have it if we did. A sound made him turn. Emma had come outside, wrapped in a blanket. Nervous? She asked. Terrified, Marcus admitted. What if I'm wrong? What if the caves don't hold? What if Sarah goes into labor in the worst possible place? Emma moved beside him, looking up at the same stars. Grandpa William told me something once. I was maybe 10 years old, and we were hiking. I asked him how he always knew which trail to take. He said, the mountain tells you, but only if you listen. And sometimes the right path is the one everyone else forgot. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. He was preparing you too. All of us. Yeah, Emma agreed. He just didn't get to see if we'd actually learn the lesson. She turned to face her brother. But Marcus, we're not doing this blind. We have maps, 2 generations of maps. We have supplies. We have each other. And most important, we have something most people don't. What's that? We have ancestors who loved us enough to leave us away through the dark. As they stood there, the mountain itself seemed to shift, just a tiny tremor, an aftershock ripple that made the ground quiver. A reminder that they were running out of time. Tomorrow, Marcus said, we trust the old knowledge. We trust Grandpa. We trust Patricia. And we trust ourselves. Emma nodded. Tomorrow, we go into the mountain. Inside the cabin, Sarah woke with a gasp, her hand flying to her belly. Linda was at her side instantly. False alarm, Linda asked hopefully. Sarah breathed through the contraction, counting seconds. When it passed, she looked at Linda with frightened eyes. We need to move faster than we planned. This baby is coming, and it's not waiting for perfect timing. Linda checked her watch. The contractions were 12 minutes apart. Early labor, but undeniably real. She looked toward the window where Marcus and Emma were standing under the stars, unaware that their timeline had just collapsed. How long do we have? Sarah whispered. Linda did the math in her head. First babies usually took time. 12 to 18 hours of labor wasn't uncommon. But stress could accelerate things. The climb through the caves would either slow labor or trigger it to progress faster. We leave at first light, Linda decided. We move the supply run and the actual escape into one trip. All together, right away, no staged approach. That's more dangerous, Sarah said. So is having a baby with no medical support in a cabin that might not have running water tomorrow, Linda replied. She squeezed Sarah's hand. We're going to get through this. All of us. But as another contraction hit, slightly stronger than the last, both women shared the same unspoken fear. What if the mountain had other plans? By the time they reached the Chamber of Crosses, Sarah's contractions were 5 minutes apart, and the mountain was still trembling. But the greatest danger wasn't the earth or the dark, it was what they'd have to leave behind. The dawn that allowed no mercy. Marcus woke to Linda's hand on his shoulder and 4 words that changed everything. Sarah's in active labor. He was on his feet instantly, all exhaustion forgotten. In the cabin's main room, Sarah sat propped against pillows, breathing through a contraction while Robert timed it with his watch. Emma was already packing, moving with purpose. How far apart? Marcus asked. 8 minutes now, Linda reported. Started at 12 about 2 hours ago. We're past the point of stopping this. Marcus's mind raced through impossible calculations. The route through the caves would take 8 to 10 hours minimum with Sarah in her condition. First-time labor could last 12 to 18 hours, but stress and physical exertion could accelerate it unpredictably. They might make it through, or Sarah might give birth in a pitch-black tunnel a mile underground. We go now, he decided. Forget the staged supply runs. We take what we can carry, we move together, and we don't stop until we're out. Marcus, Robert began, but Sarah cut him off. He's right. We either make it through in one push, or... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. They moved with practiced efficiency born of desperation. Each person carried a pack designed for their capability. Marcus had the heaviest, climbing gear, rope, emergency supplies. Emma carried communications equipment and backup lights. Linda had the medical kit and supplies for delivery if needed. Robert, despite his weakening state, insisted on carrying food and water rations. And Sarah? Sarah carried only the life inside her and the determination to keep moving. By the time the sun broke over the ridge, they were descending into Entrance 1, into the Earth's memory. The first 3 passages went better than Marcus dared hope. Sarah moved slowly but steadily, Linda at her side, breathing through contractions that came like clockwork. The ancient handholds that had supported countless hands over centuries now supported theirs, and the route his grandfather had so carefully mapped proved true in every detail. In the 3rd chamber, they stopped for water and a brief rest. Sarah's face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool cave air, but her eyes remained fierce. "Tell me about the people who made these paths," she said, breathing through another contraction. "Distract me with something real." Marcus looked at the carved walls around them. They lived with the mountain, not despite it. When winter came, when earthquakes hit, when the surface world became impossible, they had these places. Safe chambers, marked routes, knowledge passed down over generations. Smart people, Sarah managed. Planning for the worst. Planning for survival, Linda corrected gently. Like we are. Passage foretested them. The route narrowed, requiring them to move single file through sections barely 2 feet wide. Sarah had to turn sideways, her pregnant belly making the squeeze nearly impossible. Marcus went ahead, Emma behind Sarah to catch her if she fell, and twice they had to stop as contractions froze Sarah in place, her breathing echoing off stone walls. "I can't," she gasped at one point, trapped in a narrow section with rock pressing on all sides. "I can't move, I can't." "Yes, you can," Emma said from behind her, voice steady and sure. "One breath. One step. That's all. Just one." Sarah sobbed once, then pushed forward. One step. Another. Until the passage opened and she collapsed against Marcus, trembling. "5 more passages," he said, supporting her weight. "Sarah, you're doing amazing." "Liar," she managed, but she was smiling through the tears. The discovery in the dark. It was in Passage 7, the chamber of records where Marcus and Emma had found the ancient maps, that things went wrong. They'd just entered when the mountain shuddered. Not like the aftershocks they'd felt before. This was deeper, stronger, a rolling motion that made the floor tilt and sent dust raining from the ceiling. Robert grabbed Linda. Marcus braced Sarah against the wall, and Emma dropped flat as the sound of grinding rock filled the world. When it stopped, 10 seconds that felt like an hour, they took inventory. No one was hurt. But behind them, back in Passage 6, they heard the unmistakable sound of falling stone. Marcus ran back to the entrance they'd just come through. His flashlight revealed the truth. The passage had partially collapsed. Not completely. They could see through to the chamber beyond, but the route was now choked with rubble and unstable. "Can we go back?" Robert asked. Marcus studied the collapse. "Maybe, but it would take hours to clear safely, and every aftershock risks bringing more down. Plus," he looked at Sarah, who was leaning against the wall, clearly exhausted. "We keep going forward. It's still the fastest way out. What if more passages collapse ahead?" Emma asked the question they were all thinking. Marcus pulled out the maps, both his grandfather's and Patricia Donovan's notes. According to these, passages 8 through 11 run through the most stable rock. Patricia surveyed them after the '87 quake and found them solid. If anything was going to collapse, it would be what's behind us, or... He paused, checking the maps. Passage 15. That one was marked questionable. How questionable? Linda asked. Marcus met her eyes. Very. Another contraction hit Sarah, stronger than before. She gripped Marcus's arm with surprising strength, breathing through it with Linda counting seconds. When it passed, Sarah looked at each of them in turn. "We don't have time for careful," she said. "We move fast as we can, and we trust the maps. Because this baby is coming whether we're safe or not, and I'd rather be on solid ground when it happens. The choice that changes everything." Passages 8 through 10 proved Sarah's instinct right. The routes were solid, well-marked, and moved steadily downward. They made good time despite Sarah's condition, and by early afternoon they'd reached Passage 11, more than halfway through. That's where they found William Chin's message. It was carved into the wall of a small chamber, written in English so clear it might have been carved yesterday instead of decades ago. If you're reading this, the mountain moved. Trust the old ways. Trust each other. Some passages may fail, but the route endures. Don't stop. Don't look back. The valley waits below. WC. Emma traced the letters with her fingers, tears streaming. He knew we'd make it this far. He believed someone would, Marcus said. Maybe not us specifically, but someone who needed these caves, someone who would follow the maps and trust the ancient knowledge. Robert was studying his supplies. I need to check my insulin levels. What he found made everyone's blood run cold. One of his insulin vials had cracked, probably during the earthquake that morning. The precious liquid had leaked out, leaving him with barely 3 days' worth instead of 9. I'll ration more carefully, Robert said, but his hands were shaking. No. Linda's voice was firm. You take what you need to stay functional. We're getting out of here today, not in 3 days. Marcus, how far to the exit? Marcus checked the maps. 7 more passages. Maybe 6 hours if we push hard. Then we push hard, Sarah said, and there was steel in her voice despite her obvious pain. Nobody dies in these caves. Not today. The passage that demands everything. Passage 12 was easy. Passage 13 was moderate. Passage 14 descended steeply but remained stable. And then they reached passage 15, the one marked questionable on both maps, the one Patricia Donovan had flagged with a warning. Unstable ceiling structure. Avoid if possible. But there was no avoiding it. The route split at passage 14, and the alternative path added another 4 hours to their journey. Time they didn't have with Sarah's contractions now 4 minutes apart and Robert looking grayer by the hour. Marcus stood at the entrance to passage 15, his headlamp revealing a tunnel that looked more fragile than anything they'd encountered. The ceiling showed clear fracture lines, and small piles of debris on the floor indicated recent rock falls. How long is it? Continue 11:04. Marcus consulted the maps. 300 feet. Maybe 5 minutes at normal pace. And if we move fast? Sarah asked, breathing through another contraction. 2 minutes. But fast means less careful. More vibration. More risk of triggering a collapse. They stood in silence, each calculating impossible odds. Then Sarah straightened, her hand on her belly. We go fast, she decided. 1 person at a time, 20 seconds apart. That way if something goes wrong, only 1 person is at risk. Sarah, you're not going alone, Marcus protested. Yes, I am. Because if that ceiling comes down, I need you alive to dig me out, not buried beside me. Her eyes were fierce. We've come too far to all die in the last mile. The logic was brutal and perfect. They couldn't argue. Marcus went first, moving at a controlled run through passage 15. The ceiling groaned, but held. Emma went next, then Linda, then Robert, each crossing taking seconds that felt like hours. And then it was Sarah's turn. She stood at the entrance, timing her crossing between contractions. Marcus watched from the far side, every muscle tense, willing her forward. When the contraction passed, Sarah moved. She was halfway through when the mountain shuddered again. This time it was worse, a deep, fundamental shift that felt like the earth itself was breaking. Dust exploded from the ceiling, and Marcus watched in horror as cracks spread across the tunnel roof like lightning. Sarah, run, he screamed. She ran. 7 months pregnant, in active labor, with a mountain collapsing above her, Sarah Chun ran like her life depended on it, because it did. The ceiling began to fall in sections, rock crashing behind her, ahead of her, beside her. Marcus reached into the tunnel, heedless of danger, and grabbed her outstretched hand as the final section came down. They fell backwards together into passage 16, and the entrance to passage 15 disappeared under tons of stone. For a moment, no one moved. Then Emma began checking Sarah frantically while Linda examined Robert, who'd been knocked down by the shockwave. Marcus just held his wife, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, alive, breathing here. Is everyone okay? Linda called out. Miraculously, yes. Bruised, shaken, covered in dust, but whole. Sarah pulled back from Marcus, her hands on her belly. The baby's moving. Everything feels okay. Then another contraction hit, and she gasped. But we need to move. Now. This is happening soon. The final passages. Passage 16 was mercifully short. Passage 17, the last one, descended steeply but remained solid. And as they made the final turn, Marcus saw something that made him want to weep with relief. Daylight. Not the full sun. It was late afternoon now, but genuine, blessed daylight filtering down through the exit tunnel. They'd made it. The last 100 yards took forever and no time at all. They climbed through narrow sections, helped each other over rough spots, and finally emerged onto a hillside overlooking the valley floor. Behind them, the mountain they'd just passed through looked solid and unmoved, as if it hadn't just tried to kill them all. Sarah made it 20 feet from the cave entrance before her water broke. "Okay," Linda said, shifting immediately into professional mode. "Robert, get the emergency supplies. Emma, I need you to help me. Marcus, you hold Sarah and don't let her see your panic face." "I don't have a panic face," Marcus protested. "You absolutely do," Sarah said, then gasped as another contraction hit. The birth took 3 hours. It happened on a hillside in the fading light, attended by a grandmother, a sister, a father, and a diabetic grandfather who kept lookout despite trembling hands. And when the baby finally emerged, crying loud and strong in the mountain air, every single one of them wept. "It's a girl," Linda announced, wrapping the infant in clean blankets they'd carried through the caves. Small but healthy, breathing perfect, all fingers and toes present. Sarah held her daughter against her chest, exhausted and radiant. "Her name is Patricia," she said, looking at Marcus. "Patricia Wei-chun, for the woman whose maps helped save us." Marcus kissed his wife's forehead, unable to speak. Emma documented it all with her camera: the baby, the mountain behind them, the cave entrance that had become their lifeline. Robert checked his supplies and realized with surprise that he had enough insulin to make it to the hospital now, with the valley floor accessible. As full dark fell, they saw lights approaching. A rescue helicopter, search teams, civilization returning. The earthquake's disruption hadn't isolated them forever. Help was coming, but they hadn't waited for it. They'd saved themselves, following paths carved by people who'd understood that survival meant preparing for the impossible, preserving knowledge for generations yet to come, and trusting that when the mountain moved, the old ways would still hold true. The truth that echoes forward. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a small ceremony at the local historical society. They'd invited him to present his findings: the maps, Patricia Donovan's notes, and documentation of the ancient cave system that had saved 5 lives. News crews were present. Archaeologists had examined the caves and confirmed they were part of a vast network used by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. The Forest Service was in the process of officially mapping and preserving the system. And Patricia Donovan's family, who'd never known what happened to her, finally had closure and answers. But for Marcus, the most important moment came when an elderly woman approached him after the presentation. She introduced herself as Mary Blackfoot, a descendant of the Salish people who'd originally lived in those mountains. "Your grandfather came to our elders many years ago," she said softly. "He asked permission to document the caves, to make sure the knowledge wasn't lost. We taught him what we remembered, what our grandparents had passed down. He promised to use it only to help, only to save. I'm glad he kept his promise." Marcus felt tears forming. He prepared for decades. Stocked supplies, created maps, made sure someone would know. Mary nodded. "That's what wisdom is. Not knowing everything, but making sure knowledge survives. Your daughter will grow up knowing that survival isn't about being strongest or fastest. It's about remembering, learning, and trusting what came before." That evening, Marcus sat with Sarah and Patricia, baby Trisha, as they called her, watching the sunset from their new home in the valley. Emma was there, Robert and Linda too, a family held together by something more than blood. "Do you think about the caves?" Sarah asked. "Every day," Marcus admitted. "About Grandpa William spending 40 years documenting them. About Patricia Donovan dying to keep exploring them. About all the people over all the centuries who used them and preserved them." "What would you tell them if you could?" Emma asked. Marcus thought for a long moment, watching the mountains turn gold in the dying light. Then he looked at his daughter, this tiny life who existed because generations of people had decided knowledge was worth preserving. "I'd tell them thank you," he said finally, "and that their wisdom didn't die with them. It echoed forward, through time and stone and darkness, until it reached us when we needed it most." Little Patricia made a small sound, and Sarah adjusted her gently. She'll learn these stories, Sarah said. She'll know about the maps and the caves, and the people who saved us by saving knowledge. She will, Marcus agreed. And maybe someday, when the mountain moves again, because it will, someone will remember. Someone will have the maps. Someone will know that the earth remembers, that the old paths never die. As night fell over the mountains, the family sat together in the warm safety of their home, held by knowledge that had survived centuries and would survive centuries more. Because that's what wisdom does. It endures. And in the end, that's all survival really is. Knowledge passed forward, trust given backward, and the courage to follow old maps into the dark when everyone else says there's no way through. The mountain stands eternal. The paths beneath remain. And somewhere in the dark, carved into stone that will outlast generations, William Chin's final message waits for the next person who needs it. When the mountain moves, follow the numbers. Trust the old ways. The valley waits below.